The UAE recognizes the role of education in building a knowledge driven economy. An educated and empowered workforce is clearly at the top of the UAE's agenda. With this in mind, Your Excellency, how do you believe we can integrate education and the advanced skills we mentioned earlier to overcome the crisis we are experiencing today?
I think it's fundamental that education and skills go hand in hand. I call them two sides of the same coin, right? I've seen many graduates who scored had high academic attainment, high GPAs. However, they faced difficulty getting a job, or they were not able to progress in their career because of the other skills. Today, as you might have noticed over the past 2 decades, the mode of teaching has changed from school all the way to university. So if I go back to school, I did the UK curriculum, I did the A levels and the GCSEs. It was mostly driven in terms of focusing purely on academia. But now my kids are, for example, doing IB, which is more about helping them think for themselves, helping them getting that critical thinking more. And we're seeing that embedded in different curriculums. Even when the OECD run their TIMSS and PISA exams, they used to assess purely for maths and English and reading as well. But now they're also assessing for problem solving, for critical thinking. So we're seeing increasingly the different curriculums and different governments embedding social emotional learning into curriculum. The same goes for university. Right now, students are expected to become much more independent. We are seeing as well a closer integration between university and labor market. There's a big emphasis on internships, on co-op programs. And also we've seen something interesting where universities do take feedback from employers. They're trying to bridge the gap, even though it's a short-term gap with the existing labor market, but at least understand what the gaps are and constantly evolving it. We also have a project where we signed about a few weeks ago with the University of Birmingham in Dubai, where we are experimenting with the notion of how could a teacher, let's say a maths teacher or a science teacher, teach a subject, so they have content to be taught, but during that teaching, how could they also embed skills like creativity, like communication, like financial literacy and so forth? That in itself is challenging because a teacher at the end of the day has to cover syllabus. And asking them to do that and also embed skills is extremely challenging. So that's something that we've commissioned. And we've also allowed for 3 PhDs or for UAE nationals to join that to understand how can you embed the skills. And then if you do, how would these skills help students develop as they progress through the years? That's something that we're very excited about.
The UAE is well known for its visionary leadership and its ability to plan 10, 20, and even 50 years ahead. The current situation has taken the world by surprise, Your Excellency. What are, in your opinion, the most important lessons learned from this crisis that can be invested in advanced skills in the UAE and globally? How can universities in the UAE prepare our future workforce for unforeseen situations such as the one we are currently in? What are, in your opinion, the key skill sets required for the new labor market and for remote work?
So I think COVID-19, as many people know, it's had some blessings in disguise. And one of them is the digitization, remote work, remote learning. We've seen massive upskilling happening nationwide, globally, on the digital space. We've seen teachers forced to use digital technology. We've seen students forced to use digital technology. Whole companies running efficiently using digital technology. So on one hand, we were blessed that if this was run without COVID-19, it would have taken a much longer time on the policy side and also on the implementation side for people to upskill themselves on the digital front. In a matter of few months, we did what couldn't have been achieved in years to come. People today are far more comfortable holding meetings virtually instead of flying over. So I think that to me is a great attainment. Now, the lesson learned from my perspective is that in the beginning, we're very excited that people are getting now tech savvy and comfortable with technology. And we assumed that there'll also be a greater appetite for self-learning through online portals. What happened was the opposite. So when you spend your time as a student learning, 6, 8 hours, or as an employee, last thing you need is to spend another hour or two going online and getting courses. So it backfired somewhat, to be honest, but that to me is more of a temporary setback. What also, I think, for me, a lesson learned was, um, because I'm also heading civil service in the UAE, we got a lot of questions from leaders asking us, so how do I assess my employees? They're not in front of me. How do I assess effectiveness? And we did develop a guideline which talks about transactional jobs. So, for example, someone that processes applications versus the non transactional jobs. How can you quantify that? So, that really pushed us hard to think about how do you measure productivity? And there were two schools of thought. There was one thought of, adding AI to the camera and seeing whether you're really working or not. How many emails do you send? That's more of the input based. And I think, to me, that is more on the policing side, and I'm not a big fan of that. We opted to move away from that and focus on the output, because at the end of the day, with digital technology, these the differentiation between work and home became a gray area. And we noticed that even though we're being asked our employees being productive, we realized we're actually being overworked because work has interfered with their home. And so we shifted the focus to focus on outputs. That's one key lesson learned. And the third point, I think, for me was the importance of creativity in context outside the typical creative industry. And I'll give you one example. Part of the repercussions of COVID-19 was not only healthcare and social, but also economic. And a lot of companies, startups, governments were pushed to become financially creative. So we realized, even within my own team, I thought there's no budget for this. Go figure it out. The moment you push your employees to become more creative, they came back with amazing creative solutions financially. So there was a bigger link to us that we found out about creativity when it comes to a hard skill like finance. How can I finance my project in a creative way? How can I negotiate my contracts in a creative way to be able to make further savings? So these are the key lessons we found from COVID-19. Overall positive, and hopefully, inshallah, after this pandemic is over, I think we'll find ourselves with a much better skilled workforce that are better equipped for the future.
Following on from the previous question, and based on your expertise in this area, what are your main directives and plans on promoting advanced skills in the community and labor market? And finally, Your Excellency, what would you advise people who are looking for jobs?
Yes. So when it comes to promoting skills or upskilling, it really is a government and private sector partnership. We were back in January in Davos. We were founding members as a UAE within an initiative headed by the World Economic Forum called the Reskilling Platform, the Global Reskilling Platform. And as an outcome of that, we have accelerators in different countries, and we're launching one today called the World Economic Forum Accelerator in the UAE. And CEO of ADNOC, His Excellency Dr. Sultan Al Jaber, is also a co-chair on that accelerator, where we try and find 4 or 5 co-chairs from public and private that will help put down the criteria and the methods and the incentives to push individuals, academia, companies, and government to adopt lifelong learning. And there are many ways to do it. So, for example, if you take Singapore has a very hands-on approach where the government actually analyzed all all job profiles, predicted them for the future, gave vouchers for employees. There was a lot of hand-holding from government. Other extremes, where it was left for the individual, like the US market, does not necessarily see upon itself the task of reskilling people, but leaving it open in terms of competitiveness space. So there are many ways to go about it. We're defining the role for the UAE, and we're very happy to see that even before the accelerator was launched, there were good examples of companies, like, for example, Majid Al Fatim, who through the COVID-19 situation was able to skill and reskill their employees. As an example, I'm sure you saw the most famous video they had where they rerouted or repurposed their cinema employees to go work in the hypermarket because the demand shifted around. That's a small example of what we are doing as well as government. We do have employees supposed to be customer facing in a normal physical setting, but with the remote work, they no longer have employees in front of them. So we had to repurpose them as well. So from my perspective, I think it's a government, private sector, and university approach. It's a multifaceted approach. We have also pushed universities today and given them 1 year time frame to allow for lifelong learning for all alumni. So if you graduate from AUD or Khalifa University or whatever it may be, you are still given access by your university over the next couple of years to be able for free to go back and upskill yourself. So a bit of it is on the individual, a bit of it is on the private sector, on the government and the university, but we want to create an ecosystem that promotes that for the future.
Thank you so much for your insights, Your Excellency. It has been fantastic to hear about all the different initiatives.
Thank you so much for hosting me. And I hope we meet in person.
I hope so as well, Your Excellency.
Thank you.